The CDC is going to bring Americans exposed to the hantavirus back here for quarantine. We'll tell you the latest on that virus. And in a win for Republicans, the Virginia Supreme Court throws out the state's redistricting plan. And the Pentagon releases previously classified documents about UFOs. The White House tells a conspiracy-loving public, enjoy. Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in for Major Garrett tonight. Welcome to the Takeout and happy Friday to you. The cruise ship at the center of the hantavirus outbreak will dock in the Canary Islands in Spain at some point on Sunday. Officials from the CDC are en route to meet the 17 Americans aboard and transfer them by plane to Nebraska, where they will quarantine for 6 weeks. World health officials are tracking the ship's path to contact trace for any possible new cases. So far, there are 5 confirmed cases connected to the cruise ship MV Hondius. There have also been 3 deaths. The virus is typically known to spread through contact with rodents, but it may have passed from human to human aboard the ship. That's according to the WHO. Now, here in the U.S., 6 states are monitoring people who came into contact with people exposed to the virus. While the COVID pandemic is fresh in people's minds and a disease that is unfamiliar can cause some anxiety, the WHO is seeking to calm those fears, saying, quote, "This is not the start of a COVID pandemic." So to help separate fact from fear, CBS News medical correspondent Celine Gounder is here to help us all navigate this. Dr. Gounder, thank you so much. I think you know well, when people hear any sort of virus now, they think of COVID, and that's where all the fear comes in and the questions. So let's start there. How is this virus different from COVID-19?
So this is not a viral respiratory infection. Hantavirus typically, and I will say typically, is transmitted through rodent urine, saliva, or droppings, and those get aerosolized. Maybe you're sweeping up in your shed or you're vacuuming, and that's how people normally get infected with a hantavirus. Andes virus is a little bit different. What we know about Andes virus is that it has been transmitted person to person, but it's still a lower respiratory tract infection when that happens. So in other words, it's in the lungs. And so you need to have very prolonged, close contact with somebody to be infected in that fashion. It's more like tuberculosis than it is like COVID or flu or measles. What we have seen with the biggest outbreak of Andes virus in Argentina, the people who were most likely to be infected were actually sexual partners. Not to say that this is sexually transmitted, but it's that very close, intimate contact, sleeping in the same bed, kissing, et cetera. Those are the people who are far more likely to get infected, even than just other household contacts. The really good news we got in the last day was that the flight attendant who was exposed on a flight to one of these hantavirus cruise ship passengers who was returning home on a plane, that flight attendant has tested negative. She was having some symptoms, was worried it was hantavirus. It is not hantavirus. Now, she will still need to continue to be monitored. A Spanish passenger from the same flight is also being tested. But if this same pattern holds, that supports that the virus requires prolonged, close contact to transmit.
So that's some of the descriptions of how contagious it is. How deadly is it? And then also, can you walk us through, we're hearing, 6 weeks quarantining for those who are landing in Spain. What's this quarantine like?
Yeah, so the case fatality rate is quite high for those who progress to severe hantavirus. It results in lung and heart failure, and when that happens, the only way to save somebody is to use a heart-lung bypass machine, what we call ECMO. In terms of the 17 Americans who are being brought back, so the ship arrives in Tenerife, Spain on Sunday. The State Department is coordinating a repatriation flight with the CDC that will have biocontainment units on board. Nebraska Medical Center, the only federally funded quarantine unit in the country, is on standby, and they will be drawing upon their experience with the early COVID cruise ship quarantines. So far, the 17 Americans who left the ship earlier are being, the 7 Americans who left the ship earlier who are back in the 5 states. None of them have symptoms. Behind the scenes, some things are moving, but publicly, unfortunately, Americans are really hearing nothing. No one from HHS or the CDC has briefed the public. No health alert has gone out to doctors telling them what to watch for. A CDC source told me that the response team was only authorized to start work on late on Wednesday, and the holdup appears to have been getting a waiver from HHS to cooperate and coordinate with the WHO. All CDC communications now have to go through these heavy filters at HHS, which is partly why the public hasn't heard much of anything yet. There are no pre-prepared quarantine protocols for hantavirus, so they're writing them as we speak. And monitoring is being handled state by state while the CDC finalizes those guidance.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, when I first started to hear about this, one of the questions I had was about all these cuts that we saw to the CDC last year. Does that have any impact on their work, how they can contact trace, for example? What kind of impact could you see?
Well, the impact is from the top all the way down. So you have who can speak to the American public and have authority and be trusted, have credibility in this situation. We don't have a CDC director. We don't some of the leading experts in infectious diseases and vaccines and emerging infectious diseases have been fired or left the CDC. You don't have a surgeon general. So who does that leave? Well, you have the State Department that's coordinating this response. So Marco Rubio, we have Secretary Kennedy. There's, I guess President Trump, but there's not a lot of leadership on the public health front. And then I think one thing people don't realize is public health functions a lot like the military. It's very much about operations, logistics, the chain of command. And when that chain of command has been decimated from the top all the way down, that does create issues for coordination, for communication. The good news is that there are some very expert people on the ground, specialists in Nebraska, for example, at the quarantine unit. They are excellent, but you just need to have all the different pieces functioning together to coordinate a response like this.
We are very lucky to have your expertise, Dr. Gounder. Thanks for level setting with us and for our audience. We appreciate it. In a victory for Republicans, the Virginia Supreme Court tossed out a new congressional map that was approved by voters just last month. As you can see here from these two maps, Democrats gained as many as 4 House seats in that referendum. But the ruling strips the party of those potential seats and reverts back to the old map that you see here on the left of your screen. So CBS News election law expert and contributor David Becker joins me now to help make sense of all of this. David, good to see you. A couple of weeks ago, we were covering this big referendum in Virginia. 1.6 million voters in Virginia voted to have these maps. And now the Supreme Court there, which we knew was a possibility, has overturned it. What's behind this? How did it get to this point, and why did they strike it down?
So a majority of the court, is a 4-3 decision, said that basically the legislature had not completed jumping through all of the procedural hoops it needed to jump through by the right time in order for this to be passed in time for this next year's election, in time for the referendum that just happened. Now, that was surprising to a lot of people because there was litigation over this effort going back to last fall when the legislature first started it. And the Supreme Court of Virginia had many opportunities to tell the legislature, to tell the map drawers that these are the hoops you need to jump through. Specifically, you need to get the maps done before, quote unquote, election day, which the majority of the court, these 4 justices, said was the beginning of early voting. That's not really the way we usually think of Election Day. If you think about Election Day in the United States, we think of Election Day as the last day of voting, even though states have early voting well before it. The dissent says this was not the way it's interpreted in Virginia either. And the 3 dissenting justices, including the Chief Justice, really called the majority out for, appearing to have played politics here in a way that, took away the will of the people, the millions of Virginia voters who voted on this referendum.
So what the Supreme Court says will stand. There's no opportunity to challenge this before.
Well, this is a state law issue, so the Virginia Supreme Court is the last word on that state law issue. However, Governor Spanberger has said they're going to try to move something through the legislature again. Whether that will stand or not, I don't know. We'll see. But what I'm really watching is how the justices and the judges all around the country are being perceived by the American people. Last week, we saw the Supreme Court, by a 6-3 vote, overturn decades and decades of precedent on the Voting Rights Act, which has led to a feeding frenzy on redistrictings around the country, particularly amongst Republicans. The Florida plan is going to go up before the Florida Supreme Court. There is a constitutional provision in the Florida law that says you can't have a partisan gerrymander. That's a 24-4 plan. But those justices were also appointed by Governor DeSantis and Republicans. So we'll see how much politics plays into this and whether that has a long-term effect on the perception of legitimacy amongst the judiciary.
And I can't help but thinking this is all coming as we're in primary season. So there's so much confusion for voters, let alone people who are running for office. And then the general election is not too far away. Just really quickly, is it possible to see at this point whether Republicans or Democrats have an advantage here, or does it appear to be a wash?
No, one of the things I'm always watching is both parties think they're gaming the system a little bit to try to gain some advantage. But the people who have the last say on this are the voters. And minor turnout differentials can really change how these plans go out. And that's why we saw things like wave elections in 1994, 2010, 2018. We could see a wave election this year as well, and that could upset all of the expectations of the parties, especially when parties, in order to maximize their gains, need to minimize some of their margins to get more districts. And so some of those districts they might be drawing might become vulnerable to a wave election.
Interesting to watch, and we'll keep an eye on those other states. David Becker, thank you as always for your time. And the Department of Defense today started releasing previously classified documents related to UFOs. The files included dozens of videos of unresolved reports of sightings of unidentified aerial phenomenon, like this one that you see here from 2013 that was spotted somewhere in the Middle East. Some of the documents also contain photos taken from the surface of the moon of objects observed by NASA astronauts during the Apollo 12 and Apollo 17 missions. President Trump had long promised to release documents like these. Alex Dietrich joins me now. She's a retired Navy fighter pilot and has spoken about her own experience encountering a UFO during a training exercise. Thanks so much for being here. I want to get to that experience in a minute. But you were one of the many people who were pushing for these files to be released. I remember the president talking about doing so on the campaign trail and the like. Why did you want these to be released?
I think that transparency is the right instinct here, and I'm genuinely glad that this material is out in the public domain. What I would do is caution any impulse to treat today as an answer. So it's the beginning of a process. The Pentagon said so themselves, that these files have yet to be fully analyzed. And so right now our response should be to read them carefully, be patient, and not race to any conclusion.
What do you think needs to happen to make sure we can kind of better understand these incidents?
Yeah, I think that we need to approach this systematically. Again, this is an important first step. We need to work together. When we talk about the Pentagon, we should also be talking about NASA. We should also be talking about the FAA. This is a national security concern. It's also a safety of flight issue. And of course, the big brain scientists at NASA and even in academia really should be a part of this to help us contextualize the data and make sense of it. Maybe even see if there's some predictive trends in the data so that we can find when and where the next incident might happen.
And I mentioned in the intro that you have your own experience seeing a UFO. What was that like? Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw and how did you report it?
Sure. Our incident, the USS Nimitz Tic Tac encounter is sometimes what it's referred to as, happened off the coast of California in 2004. We were in the middle of training, pre-deployment training, getting ready to go to the Gulf. And so we were not carrying weapons. We were practicing our maneuvers, and we saw something strange. We couldn't identify it. It was the middle of the day, clear blue skies, calm waters, and we saw this strange object behaving strangely with weird physics. And so we reported it. We reported it through our intelligence channel and our chain of command. But part of the value of having these documents released today and talking about it in a serious and grounded way is to encourage other people who see strange things to say something, to report them, and then to have a system, a office and analysts there to receive the information, the technology and tools to analyze it. And again, maybe we can predict when and where something will happen and make sense of whether this is a national security threat, a safety concern, or just something curious for scientists.
Yeah, and the follow through, as you mentioned, is critical here. And this is just the first batch, so we'll see what else comes out from these releases. Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And moving to the economy now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a better than expected jobs report for April. The U.S. economy added 115,000 jobs last month, which is much higher than the 65,000 jobs that were predicted. The unemployment rate stayed steady at 4.3%. CBS News Money Watch correspondent and co-host of CBS Saturday Morning, Kelly O'Grady, joins me now. Kelly, great to see you. Thanks for being here. We're talking a lot about the state of the economy with everything going on in Iran, but with these jobs numbers, what does that tell us about how the economy is doing right now?
Great to be with you. And at the stock exchange, even after it closes, there's still a lot of celebrating right on cue. So look, this tells me that the job market is solid. It's resilient. I don't want people to say, oh, wow, this is a huge number, because if you go back to a couple years ago when we saw that big sort of surge coming out of COVID, that was when everyone was saying, wow, we are going gangbusters. It's really strong. But it is solid. And so I think this was the first month where the last couple of months there was a lot of noise. We had a healthcare strike, a really bad February, a really strong March that was actually revised upward in this particular April jobs report. And so this shows us, even with all of the uncertainty, companies are still hiring, and hiring, by the way, across a number of industries. It wasn't just healthcare that was the driver. It was retail, leisure and hospitality, transportation and warehousing. The thing, though, that did concern me is that wages did not rise as much as I was hoping. In fact, especially as prices are rising with rising gas prices, we only saw wages increase 0.2%. We like that to be higher than how much prices are rising so that you get more room in your wallet. And then the labor participation rate dropped to the lowest level since September 2021, mainly because of immigration policies, as well as people just saying, hey, I'm not finding a job that fits my skill set. I'm just going to tap out for a little while. But at the highest level, I would say this is a resilient, good job market.
And Kelly, it's interesting because when you look at consumer sentiment, that's still pretty low. There's this new report out from the University of Michigan saying that it's hit a new low, actually. So what should we make of that? Is that kind of speaking to that uncertainty that you're talking about?
Yeah, so basically, we track consumer sentiment because if consumers don't feel good because of what's happening with the war in Iran and whatever else may be frustrating them, they might go out and spend less. This is where we might see companies pull back from their hiring. We just haven't seen it yet. And that's where my focus will be in terms of whether the war with Iran does impact companies. Yeah, maybe on the cost side with energy prices, but it's really going to be whether consumers start spending less.
All right, we will stay tuned. Kelly O'Grady, thanks for navigating all that noise for us. We appreciate your insights and reporting. And President Trump insists the ceasefire with Iran is still in effect, despite both sides admitting to strikes in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. said Friday it fired on 2 Iranian-flagged oil tankers that were trying to get past the U.S. blockade. Iran called the U.S. action a breach of the ceasefire. And this all comes as Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. is expecting to hear a response from Iran sometime today on its latest peace deal proposal. So we have CBS News contributor Roger Carstens joining us now. He's a retired lieutenant colonel with the Army Special Forces. Great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So much to unpack today on this Friday. We've been talking all week about what is going on in the Strait of Hormuz. Is this a ceasefire there if you're still not able to get the ships through?
No, I think historically it is a ceasefire. If you take a look at wars going back in time immemorial, you'll find that people will take a pause in a war, and yet there's still going to be border skirmishes, an attack here, a mistake there. So in a way, this looks very normal to me. But the fact that I would say that the blockade's still intact. I think the U.S. Navy said they've blocked more than 70 ships that are preparing to go in, but they're staying outside. They've prevented 57 ships from docking in the last few days. And I think over the last 72 hours, not one ship's really crossed the line into the space there. So I think overall, the blockade's working. The ceasefire is nominally working. And I think the most important thing that's happening today is waiting to see if the Iranians respond to the U.S. proposal.
Exactly. I mean, to that point, you have an Iranian official saying today that they're not going to give up control of the strait because they said it's as precious as an atomic bomb. Yeah. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had this to say. Let's take a listen.
Obviously, we've seen the reporting overnight that Iran has established or trying to establish some agency that's going to control traffic in the straits. That would be very problematic. That would actually be unacceptable.
Okay, so those are two different things, right? Yeah. You're great at this. How do you get to a deal then?
It's going to be hard. I would say we may not even get there. I think Secretary of State Rubio is absolutely correct. The United States has always supported freedom of navigation everywhere in the world. To allow the Iranians to control the strait, I think would be a very bad move on everyone's part. No one would gain for that with the exception of the Iranians. But I would offer that the United States is in a very strong position right now. It may not look like that, but if you want to put the midterms to the side, President Trump has 2.5 years right now to exert power if he were to take the war that far. We have total naval and air domination out there. We have infantry in the way of Marines that are en route or there. So we're in a very strong place in terms of what we were able to marshal in terms of combat power with our Israeli partners. So I would say, if I were to give any advice to the negotiators, I'd like, be tough, make sure that you get what you want. I would add prisoners to the list of demands, and then I would go in and see what you can get. I mean, President Trump's right to try to negotiate, but I wouldn't be so easy on the Iranians. It's
interesting. I mean, our audience is very familiar with your work negotiating the release of hostages. So in this kind of situation, you've worked in this region a lot. Who are you working with here if they're the U.S., if you're the U.S.? Because who's in charge?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the combat operations that we had clearly degraded their command and control architecture. People are having a hard time still communicating, determining who's in charge. It's clear in terms of the Iranian response to any offer that we've had that they're having some problems, I guess, marshaling command and control. In another way, we're again still in a good position because they're having times talking or having a hard time talking internally within the government. But I think what you're going to find is that the IRGC is going to keep reigning supreme, either to the front or most likely behind the scenes, to provide pressure on their political leadership when it comes closer to making that deal. So who are we talking to? We'll talk to whoever shows up. Who do I think is maybe exerting the most power behind the scenes? The IRGC.
I don't think you're alone in that. Roger Carson, thank you very much. We'll see if the deal comes through today and what it looks like. And still to come on the Takeout, presidential pardoning power is under scrutiny. A group of Democrats are raising questions about President Trump's motivations for some high-profile pardons of people financially tied to his family. Plus, a new effort by lawmakers finds just how much it costs the federal government to settle sexual harassment claims against members of Congress. I'll speak with a former congresswoman who helped make those payouts illegal. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his Make America Healthy Again allies are looking to unseat Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy in next week's primary. The state of that race with our political panel. That's coming up. Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Congressional Democrats are investigating whether some of President Trump's pardons were driven by so-called pay-to-play schemes. The lawmakers sent letters to 17 people who they claim received clemency under, quote, suspicious circumstances. The list includes Changpeng Zhao, the cryptocurrency billionaire who founded Binance. Zhao was pardoned last October after pleading guilty to money laundering. Federal disclosures show that he had 2 lawyers close to the Trump family pushing for his clemency. California Congressman David Min joins us now. He is one of the 3 Democratic lawmakers who launched this probe. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about these letters that you sent. What are some of the details? Good to see you. What are some of the details here that you are asking for in these letters?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what we're looking for is a sense of the circumstances around which they received these pardons, information as to who they engaged, who they hired, if any payments were made to people close to the Trump administration or to Donald Trump personally. And this is all based on public reporting that suggests that there's a whole industry that has popped up around Donald Trump to basically try to do a pay-to-play type scheme. And my understanding is that there have been dozens and perhaps hundreds of pardons that have been issued outside of the auspices of the Department of Justice's pardon attorney's office. And so normally under previous administrations and under Trump 1.0, they would run pardons through the pardon office of the DOJ, which would judge whether this was appropriate, whether the circumstances were potentially right for a pardon. These apparently have been bypassing that. It looks a lot like people close to Donald Trump are getting rich off of this. And we've heard reports of people who've donated millions of dollars to Donald Trump's campaigns or his different business ventures or to his children's business ventures. What we want is just answers. We want to confirm if there's any truth to this or not. Obviously, this looks very illegal. I think it really raises questions about the presidential pardon authority.
And you mentioned these suspicious circumstances. What has your investigation turned up so far? Have you found any evidence?
Well, so we just issued the letters a few days ago, and we issued a deadline for May 22nd. And I should add, my background for those who might not be familiar with me, I started my career as a federal enforcement attorney dealing with white-collar fraud of this kind. I went on to become a law professor at UC Irvine, where I very much was committed to upholding the rule of law. And so the idea that pardons are being sold to the highest bidder, that people who have defrauded seniors, people out of tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, which has been the case in a lot of these folks' situations, it's just outrageous to me. But we do think that these folks will end up turning over information to us because they have already received a pardon. They're no longer serving time. And I think if they don't respond to us by May 22nd, they'll be putting a big target on their back. And so, if you think Donald Trump's going to be president forever, maybe you should not respond to us. On the other hand, if you think there's a good chance that maybe, say, House Democrats take back control of Congress next year, I think it's in your interest to respond to us. So we're hoping to get answers here that we know we're not going to get out of the White House.
And, these pardons have already occurred. There's no way that you can claim them back, right? So what kind of power do you have here?
Well, again, if folks decide that they don't want to cooperate with us, once we take back control, we can issue subpoenas because the circumstances under which these subpoenas were issued is certainly a subject that is within the jurisdiction of, say, the House Judiciary Committee or the House Oversight Committee and their counterparts in the United States Senate. So very much we can push forward. And folks who choose not to respond to us, I think, are, again, putting a target on their back. Obstruction of justice is obviously something that could be seen out of this. So we think there's a lot of reasons why these folks would want to cooperate with us and provide us with information. We're not seeking, anything damning on their part. We're just looking for an understanding of whether these media reports are accurate or not.
And when it comes to presidential pardons in general, are there any limitations on them? I mean, the executive has wide priority.
Yeah, so I used to be a law professor, and what Donald Trump has done repeatedly in this second term is really push the boundaries of what we think we know about the Constitution. And pardons is not something that really was taught because the last time we had a bunch of cases around the pardon authority was right after the Civil War. So we really haven't had a lot of case law, but I'll state this. I've talked to a lot of pardon experts recently, and there is no presidential authority, not even his authority as commander-in-chief, that is seen as absolute. There are checks and balances on all of them. And so we do think that there can be limitations, including required disclosure, guardrails around this. And there's certainly open questions around whether the president can issue preemptive pardons for people who've not been convicted of any crime, but might be indicted or might just have committed a crime, but have not been indicted or convicted. So we think there's definitely limitations. That is clear from the text of the Constitution, the vast body of case law out there involving presidential authorities. But we'll get there when we get there. It'll probably be a couple of years before this comes up.
All right. Well, in the meantime, we will stay tuned to that deadline later this month to see if they respond. Congressman, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for
Appreciate
having
it.
me. Appreciate it.
And coming up, hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars were used to settle sexual harassment claims made against members of Congress. Former Congresswoman Jackie Speer joins me next with her reaction. You're watching The Takeout. And welcome back to The Takeout. In 2018, Congress passed a law prohibiting the federal government from paying out sexual harassment claims involving lawmakers. But those settlements may have been bigger than previously known. South Carolina Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace says a subpoena revealed that the secret payouts totaled $338,000 since 2004. So let's bring in former Democratic Congresswoman from California, Jackie Speer. She wrote the law that required members of Congress to pay for the settlements themselves and not use taxpayer funds. Congresswoman, great to see you. Thanks for being here. I think most Americans look at this and say, what? This was happening at all? So if not for this law, we wouldn't have perhaps even known. Since then, you revealed that more than $17 million has been paid out in various amounts and various settlements. Can you contextualize that number for us?
Well, first of all, the fact that since 1995, the law was protecting the harasser is something that I couldn't tolerate. And so I worked with Congressman Bradley Byrne, a Republican from Alabama, conservative. I'm a moderate liberal from California, and we could come to eye on what should be done. And so that's when we changed the whole law, which had provided attorneys for the harasser, but not for the victim. We changed that. We didn't make them jump through hoops like mediation, mandatory mediation, or cooling off periods, or requiring them to sign NDAs. What is most troubling is that since 2018, whatever cases have been dealt with haven't really been forthcoming in terms of transparency. And the fact that in Eric Swalwell's case, none of those victims came to the Workers' Right Commission is troubling. So I think Congress has got to do a deep dive into why these victims wouldn't come forward. Are they afraid of retaliation? Are they afraid of being ostracized? And there's a number of steps I think they need to take to stop this sexual predator paradise in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, what is it that you think helps, kind of keep these things going? I mean, a lot of lawmakers that I talked to on Capitol Hill say that the ethics process needs to be completely overhauled and reformed. I'm wondering if you share that view.
Well, I do. I served on a subcommittee investigating a Democratic member when I was in the House, and the process took way too long. And then when they had all the evidence, the member resigned. And that's the typical pattern. They'll stay as long as they can, and then when the report comes out or is about to come out, they resign so that the ethics committee no longer has jurisdiction over them.
And when you first passed this law back in 2018, it was the height of the Me Too movement. It seems like so long ago now, but then you look at what we just saw with Swalwell, who you mentioned, Tony Gonzalez, another expelled recently. I'm wondering if you can assess kind of the state of the Me Too movement, given that we're still seeing these cases come up.
Well, I don't think the taxpayers of this country want to have their Congress be a place where predators can roam freely. So I think it's incumbent on the House leadership and the members on both sides to change it. One of the things that has to be made perfectly clear is that if there's a claim filed for sexual harassment or having an affair with a member of your staff, you will be subject to expulsion. No question asked. No questions answered, maybe. But the truth is, that's the only thing that's going to change their behavior. If they think they're going to lose their job, they're going to think twice about their zipper.
Well, we'll leave it there, but it will be interesting to see what comes out of the information from the subpoena that Congresswoman Nancy Mace issued. Former Congresswoman Jackie Speer, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And President Trump has signed more than 250 executive orders so far this term, sidestepping Congress on issues typically under its purview. Our political panel joins me next to discuss the impact this is all having on Capitol Hill. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Next week, Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy is at risk of losing the Republican nomination after an intense primary. Axios reports Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his allies have been aiming to unseat Cassidy. And Cassidy, who's a physician, has been opposed to much of Kennedy's Make America Healthy Again movement. So to discuss this, let's bring in our political panel. Senior political reporter for Axios, Alex Eisenstadt, and national politics reporter for The Wall Street Journal, Ken Thomas, join us now. Great to see you both. Happy Friday. We made it to the end of the week. Alex, you had some reporting on this, RFK Jr.'s revenge. This is so fascinating to me because if it weren't for Cassidy, RFK Jr. would not be the Health and Human Services Secretary. What gives?
Correct. Well, Cassidy gave RFK a really pivotal vote for his confirmation, but he's still been a Maha skeptic. And he's given RFK some serious headaches when RFK goes up to the Hill and testifies. And most recently, he sunk RFK's choice to be Surgeon General, not to be Surgeon General. And so the Maha movement, including RFK and his political apparatus, they're striking back now against Cassidy with Cassidy's primary just about a week away. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out because Cassidy represents everything that the Maha movement hates, which is they see him as representative of the medical establishment. And Maha wants to overturn that.
And you know, obviously the president has not endorsed him. I'm curious how the White House is seeing how RFK has been doing in this role. I mean, you can also argue that without RFK Jr.'s support, maybe Trump wouldn't have done so well.
Yeah, I mean, RFK, I think, opened up Trump to a whole new line of voters. And the president, I think, privately has always loved the Kennedy signature as part of this administration. You know, he's behind Julia Letlow, a congresswoman who he has gotten to know. She had a sort of a tragic part in part of her career. So I think, you know, he's going to get behind Letlow. I think the question is, can Cassidy somehow make it to a runoff in Louisiana, a unique way of doing their primaries?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch if an incumbent goes down there. Ken, you also wrote a piece that I very much identified with as a congressional correspondent, which is, why is Congress struggling to do the bare minimum? I think this is something that a lot of Americans think about. Like, they can't even pass budgets on time. We just had the longest DHS shutdown in history. What's going on?
I think we've just seen a lot of dysfunction, and it's not something particularly new, but I think it's been very much pronounced in the last few months. You know, a recent Gallup poll showed that only 10% of the public approves of this Congress. That's a near record low. We've seen 56 House members decide to retire. We haven't seen that since the early 90s. And we've also seen the president really try to move around Congress using executive action to a degree that we haven't seen since Jimmy Carter's presidency. And then at the same time, they're just not really passing a lot of legislation. There have been 90 laws that have been enacted this Congress. That would be the lowest since the Civil War. So this is just a Congress that I think we've seen a lot of tension, too, of late, a lot of frustration. I'm sure you picked that up. You know, Senate Republicans not happy with House Republicans. You know, Republicans really sick and tired of Democrats. It's just, it almost seems like it's at a breaking point.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, too, you do have, I think one of the biggest stories of this Congress is how much they've ceded their power to the executive. And Trump seems perfectly happy with that. And in fact, I'm kind of curious, your reporting, you know, how invested is he really in these midterm elections? Because you could see the House flip, likely, according to projections right now. That could signal a lot of trouble for Donald Trump. Things could be very difficult for him if Democrats take the House.
You know, I had someone who's pretty close to Trump tell me recently that Trump is just naturally a political animal. He loves the stuff. He loves focusing on these races. He knows a lot about individual races. He asks for polling a lot. He loves politics. He loves campaigns, and he loves races. He loves endorsing in races.
Yeah.
It's just what he does. And he also does understand that the stakes are pretty high, right? If Republicans lose the House, it's all but certain that Democrats are immediately going to start impeachment proceedings, which is going to create big headaches for him, big headaches for people around him, and it could really hamper his ability to get anything done in the final 2 years. So he definitely understands the stakes. He understands what's at stake here. The question is how much is he going to spend out of his political bank account? How much is he going to travel? And if he does travel, where is he going to travel to? Right, exactly. I think that's the big question. Probably won't go to Maine, for example, but we'll see. I mean, Republicans have to get out their own voters, and he's the turnout operation for both parties, you could argue. So much to discuss. We'll have you both back. Ken and Alex, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. And up next, our daily tribute to CBS Radio. Today's clip, a live reading of the classic H.G. Wells novel, War of the Worlds. Very relevant right now. You're watching The Takeout. And welcome back to The Takeout and to our latest tribute to CBS News Radio. The Halloween season is typically scary only for children, but on October 30th, 1938, CBS News Radio listeners were sent into a frenzy listening to Orson Welles' reading of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. It was presented in the style of breaking news bulletin, which caused some listeners to think it was a real broadcast detailing an alien invasion. So don't worry, what you're about to hear is a work of fiction.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
For the next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states.
And that does it for The Takeout today. The Daily Report is coming up next.